Ladies and gentlemen, good day to you all joining us from different time zones across the globe. I am delighted to extend a very warm welcome to you at the Global Governance and Leadership Series 2023 for Accelerating SDGs. Why Global Governance and Leadership Series for Accelerating Pace of SDGs? Good governance is perhaps the single most important factor in eradicating poverty and promoting development, said former UN Secretary General Kofi Annan. Sustainable development is about leadership, the collective leadership of political, corporate, and civil society. Hence, Global Governance and Leadership Series for Accelerating Pace of SDGs, to foster collective thinking by the Trinity of Leadership. The theme of this summit is Role of Leadership and Good Governance in Accelerating SDGs. It is my pleasure to introduce and welcome the speakers of the Global Governance and Leadership Series 2023 for Accelerating SDGs. Professor George Mervyn King. He is the patron member of the Mervyn King Academy for Sustainable Development in Asia and Chairman, Global Advisory Board, Asian Center for Corporate Governance and Sustainability. Professor Jan Peter Balkenende, former Prime Minister of the Netherlands. Mr. Roberto Di Campo, former Finance Minister of Philippines and member of the Global Board of International Institute of Governance and Leadership, Netherlands. Professor Mahendra Chauhan, founding Dean of the Mervyn King Academy for Sustainable Development in Asia and Vice Chairman, Global Advisory Board, Asian Center for Corporate Governance and Sustainability. I now invite Professor Mahendra Chauhan for his opening remarks and request him to take over the proceedings.
Thank you. Good day, ladies and gentlemen. I'm extremely delighted to extend a warm welcome to you all to this inaugural episode of Global Governance and Leadership Series 2023 for Accelerating United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. As you're aware, this series is being jointly organized by the three great institutions. They are International Institute of Governance and Leadership Netherlands, the Mervyn King Academy for Sustainable Development in Asia, and Asian Center for Corporate Governance and Sustainability. So on behalf of these three institutions, I wish to extend a special welcome to our three speakers. Professor Jan Peter Balkenende, former Prime Minister of Netherlands. Welcome, sir, and thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule. Professor Mervyn King, patron member of the Mervyn King Academy for Sustainable Development in Asia, and Mr. Roberto Di Campo. Thank you, Mervyn, and thank you, Campo, for sparing your time for this inaugural episode of Global Governance and Leadership Series. Equally, a warm welcome to all our participants from across the world. Some of you must be wondering why Global Governance and Leadership Series 2023. So let me just say that this is a humble attempt by these three institutions for accelerating the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. The pandemic, as well as Russia-Ukraine war, have awoken a new and heightened sense of urgency in leaders worldwide that the time for immediate impactful action is now. There is also increased recognition that this kind of impactful action will require deliberate collaboration from all parts of the globe and all aspects of society. We must accelerate SDGs worldwide, and this will require collaborations from governments, industry, investors, and civil society. Therefore, a humble attempt by three institutions coming together to collectively organize Global Governance and Leadership Series 2023 for accelerating the pace of SDGs. And what are the objectives? To foster collective thinking by trinity of leadership comprising of political, corporate, and civil society leaders from across the world to accelerate pace of SDGs. So let me begin by quoting Mr. Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations, in his foreword to the Sustainable Development Goal Report of 2022. He says, as the world faces cascading and interlinked global crises and conflicts, the aspirations set out for 2030 agenda for sustainable development are in jeopardy. With the COVID-19 pandemic in its third year, which is just over, the war in Ukraine is exacerbating food, energy, humanitarian, and refugee crisis, all against the background of a full-fledged climate emergency. Using current data, the Sustainable Development Goals Report 2022 provides evidence of a destructive impacts of these crises on the achievements of the Sustainable Development Goals, that is SDGs, unquote. This Global Governance and Leadership series will comprise of 4 to 6 episodes where various eminent leaders from across the world will discuss, debate, and come up with their recommendations and suggestions for accelerating the SDGs. So let me share some of our concerns. The COVID 19 pandemic has so far directly or indirectly cost the lives of close to 15 million people. Ladies and gentlemen, 15 million people, that's huge. An estimated 147 million children missed more than half of their in person instructions over the past 2 years, significantly affecting their learning and well being. Women have been disproportionately affected by the socio-economic fallout of the pandemic, struggling with lost jobs, increased burdens of unpaid care work, and an intensifying silent epidemic of the domestic violence. The world is enduring the highest number of conflict since the creation of United Nations. Approximately 2 billion people live in the conflicted affected countries. Refugees were at the highest number on record in 2021, and forced displacement is continuing to grow, exacerbated by the war in the Ukraine. As of the end of the May 2022, some 6.5 million refugees had fled Ukraine alone, mostly women and children. By current estimate, the war could cut global economic growth by 0.9%, which is close to 1% point in 2022 and 2023, as well as undermine the development aid to the world's poor. These situations will only deteriorate with the climate change, which acts as a crisis multiplier and whose impacts are already being felt across the globe. Based on the current national commitment, global greenhouse gas emissions are set to increase by almost 14% over the current decade. To recover from the COVID-19 pandemic and to deliver global sustainability, we need an urgent rescue effort for the SDGs. So, through this Global Governance and Leadership series, we will discuss and possibly come up with the certain solutions of taking care of these concerns. The overarching theme of the Global Governance and Leadership series is the role of leadership and global governance, good governance rather, in accelerating SDGs. The role of leadership and good governance in accelerating SDGs. In today's fireside chat, I will quiz these three great leaders on how to strengthen global partnerships for sustainable development by enhancing cooperation and collaboration between governments, private sector, civil society, and other stakeholders. So let me begin and come to you, Mr. Balkanin. You've been the prime minister of a developed country like the Netherlands. Hence, you are a global leader. What are your thoughts on sustainable development goals and global challenges in general?
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be with you, and I'm proud that we can talk about these important issues. And I share your observation about the importance of the SDGs. I think the SDGs are necessary to have a better world for now and tomorrow. So I'm a big defender of the SDGs. But the key question is, and that was already the case before Corona and Ukraine started, are we on track? And the answer was already then, no, we're not on track. We have to speed up developments. We need actions and measurement. And then we got a time of Corona and the illegal war in Ukraine. And what we see now are a lot of geopolitical tensions. And the question is, with geopolitical tensions and geoeconomic fragmentation, and with a lot of difficulties, is this the arena in which we can realize the SDGs? And I'm concerned about that. And the terrible thing is that SDGs can unite people, countries, universities, businesses. So I believe we need SDGs to have a better world. And therefore, the circumstances are not okay at the moment. So therefore, I really hope that also world leaders are aware of the fact that they have huge responsibilities, because this is not only about what's happening today, this is about creating the conditions for a better life in the longer run. And if you talk about climate change, if you talk about natural resource and circular economy, if you talk about issues like Arctic melting, for example, if you talk about inequality, we need each other. And that is also the lessons there's a lesson from the past. When we talked about the Millennium Development Goals, people understood you must bring forward results, you must take action. And it was a successful goal. When we talked in early days about the hole in the ozone layer, people understood really we have to work together on a global scale. And now I think it's important to talk about the SDGs. This is one point. So I'm concerned about global developments, and we have a perspective to have a better world with the SDGs, but the circumstances are not okay at the moment. That's one. A second point of concern is that I think a lot of companies, NGOs, universities, cities are aware of the fact that we have to change things. There are new orientations. It's about sustainable business practices. It's about rethinking the curricula at universities. And my concern is that despite the fact that we have the views on how to act in the interest of the future, we have the SDGs, we know that sustainability must be integrated into business models. That's what you can see and feel, but at the same moment, there's so much traditional thinking. For example, we still are talking about the GDP in the old-fashioned way. How do we measure business results? It's predominantly quarterly results, cost-saving measures, turnover, profits, and so on. So we need new measurement tools. And then the third element, and that gives me a bit hope, you also can see there are new views on how we can change things. You are a good friend of Paul Polman, the former CEO of Unilever, and he wrote a book, and you've been quoting that book many times, of Paul and Andrew Winston, Net Positive. I think it's a beautiful example. You can do things in another way. I have a good friend at Erasmus University, Professor Rob van Tilder, and he has written a book about principles of sustainable business, frameworks on for corporate action on the SDGs. It's just a few examples. We can see that things are changing, but we have to do much more. So, in short, we need SDGs for having a better life. We see that we're not on track in realizing the SDGs. We have the disadvantage of the geopolitical tensions and geoeconomic fragmentation, and at the same moment, we have to act. So therefore, I'm very happy with your activities and your goal to talk about these important issues, and therefore I'm also happy with this online symposium.
Thank you. I think I do share your concern about geopolitical and geoeconomic fragmentation. And I also agree that we need new ways of measuring GDP. The old traditional way of thinking has to go. So thank you for that, Mr. Balkanen. Marvin, let me turn to you now. Today, about 1 in 10 people worldwide are suffering from hunger. Ukraine crisis has triggered food shortages. 149.2 million children under the age of 5 suffer from stunting. The growth is stunted. You have been the first chairman of Operation Hunger, a South African charity, a long ago. Can you please talk about how we can apply your learnings and from the Operations Hunger and accelerate the SDG number 2, that is to end hunger, achieve food security, and improve nutrition?
Yes, thank you, Mahendra. SDG 2 is the question of the vision of eradication of hunger, and to make sure that people have nutritional food. Unfortunately, as we all know, we will go to bed tonight, but a quarter of the people on planet Earth will either go to bed without potable water or without nutritional food. In 1992, we, South Africa, were going into our new dispensation of equal opportunity. But the hardships of the apartheid regime were felt before that decision was made, and particularly in the rural areas. So journalists, for example, would visit the urban areas, but the real hardship was in the so-called homelands. For example, where originally the Zulu lived, so back to KZN, KwaZulu-Natal, as their homeland, where there was in fact no infrastructure. So it was a wicked system. And the question of hunger in those areas became critical. Now, a child under the age of 3 that doesn't get proper nutritional food, their brains atrophy and they become useless members of society. At the time, and I'm going back to the middle 80s, I happened to be the chairman of 2 of the largest purchasers of fast-moving consumer goods, which includes food. It was Metro Cash and Carry Limited, listed on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, and the Checkers supermarket chain, which is hundreds of stores all over Southern Africa. So I was in that privileged position of being, as chairman of those companies, the companies of which I was the chair, was the biggest purchaser from the food producing companies in South Africa. And we approached them. There was a lady called Ina Perlman, and I approached them. Could they develop a nutritional package which could be distributed to children under the age of 3 and younger, which could sustain them for a day and as cheaply as possible? Well, they went to work on this, and to their credit, they developed a package a bit bigger than the size of my cell phone of nutritional goods which would sustain a child for a day. And we fed about 2.5 million, 3 million children every day for some, I think it was 17 years. Right through South Africa, we had points all over South Africa, and South Africa, as you all know, is a huge country. And Nelson Mandela's daughter worked with me, Zinzi. Unfortunately, she died 2 years ago. And we sustained these children. When Mr. Mandela was released from prison, I knew him before he went into prison, and then while he was in prison, through his family, I kept into communication with him. When he came out of prison, he had lunch for 12 people, and he went around the table, spoke about each person. When he came to me, he said, Judge King. He always referred to me as Judge. Judge King, if it wasn't for Judge King, there'd be thousands, millions of useless citizens in South Africa. Now, he said that because, as I said to you, if you don't feed a child nutritionally when he or she is young, they become useless members of society because their brains actually atrophy. So that was the story of Operation Hunger, which went for many years. And then I became a director of First National Bank and chairman of their corporate and merchant bank. And through them, underwriting thing, I was able to raise millions of rands to, that's our currency, to pay these producers of food. And so it was like a circular thing, but these children were fed. So what conclusion do we draw from all this? That we have to apply our minds to try and fulfill the SDGs. And I just quickly give you another example. SDG 4, quality education. In my travels around the world as a corporate governance leader, as you know, we've moved away from the primacy of the shareholder to a value creation model. And some universities and business schools were still teaching in this silo mentality instead of the integrated way. And I decided to take SDG 4 and SDG 17 and put them together and started what I call the Good Governance Academy. And the purpose was to educate the educators, to make sure that they were teaching young people who were coming out as commerce students, as accountants, etc., would know that the thinking was changed to an integrated thinking and not just sitting in silos. Human resource sits in a certain place in financial capital and one doesn't talk to the other. Operationally, these things are all integrated. And so we have 2 colloquia a year, and through my network, the last colloquium I had, the summary went to 5.4 million directors and accountants in 135 countries. So it is, in 4 years, it has blossomed and it's worked. So what I'm saying, exactly what Mr. Balkander said, we as corporate and governance leaders around the world have to apply our minds to these SDGs. We certainly are not on track from a timeline point of view, but we've got to apply our minds to try and achieve these purposes, which I agree with Mr. Balkander that we won't achieve it by 2030, but we've got to persevere to try and achieve these goals.
Thank you, Marvin. I think feeding 2.5 to 3 million children every day is amazing, really. And I think this idea of nutritional package is interesting. So in India, what is happening is we have a scheme called midday meal scheme in the schools, because the majority of absenteeism in the schools of the children is because they don't have enough nutrition. So it has become an incentive that children to come to school. So it's a win-win situation. The absenteeism has reduced and the nutrition has improved. So thank you for sharing that Operation Hunger's experience with us. Let me turn back to Mr. Balkanen. Let's now talk about European Green Deal, Mr. Balkanen. This is a very progressive deal. EU is striving to be the first climate neutral continent, which is a welcome aspiration. How is it going to impact SDG number 13, that is the climate action?
Yep. Happy with your question. You clearly can see that something is changing in Europe. You're talking about the Green Deal, and I think it's very important that the European Council, European Commission, European institutions, but also heads of government and also the business sector are saying we have to change things. That conviction is clearly there. And you also can see that there is a connection between the Green Deal, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, the taxonomy, and other developments. That's good. So something is changing. So partly it has to do with policy making at the European scale and the implementation at the national scale. But if you talk with the business sector, also businesses should be in line with those goals. And now there's a kind of discussion in Europe, what is happening? I think that the mainstream is going into the right direction. That's good. People are aware of the fact that the essence of the Green Deal is necessary, but it's more about the practicalities, what is possible and what not. But in any case, things are going in the right direction. I'm happy with this development because it also can create a new view for the future of Europe. Some years ago, I said, if you talk about the future of Europe, I think we have to redefine our position. And the story of Europe could be a story of be in line with SDGs, take care for realizing results, a Europe of reforms and a Europe of values. Today, I'm busy with Professor Govert Buijs of the Free University to write a book on the future of market economies in Europe. And what we've been describing is there are so many economic challenges at the moment, but there are also new economic insights. If you talk about the history of Europe, we have the bad pages of European history: colonialism, imperialism, wars, the guillotine, the gas chambers. It's all there. But there's also another part of European history, and it has to do with human rights, democracy, science, culture, and so on. And if you would use these important elements of European history to realize a better future by taking into account the SDGs, that's helpful. And it also is connected with which are the values that are so relevant. Well, then your point, you're completely right. If Europe would take up its responsibility and make the Green Deal, making it a reality of it, then it has to clearly to do with the SDGs. And therefore, it's so important that you must have a kind of policy involvement. You must have businesses that will act in line, convinced also by the SDGs. But also you need, let's say, schools and universities. I have seen in my country some beautiful examples. For example, all the University of Applied Sciences, they have integrated the SDGs into their curricula. So that means that students must learn about SDGs, and they are invited to bring forward ideas for new products and services that would be in line with SDGs. I've seen a lot of creativity. A few months ago, I attended a conference of all the deans of economic faculties and business schools in the Netherlands, and it was all about the question: what can we do in the sphere of sustainability, and what's our impact? So things are fortunately changing. And maybe also another example. You know, the Netherlands has been a gas-producing country for a long time, but we've said we should stop producing gas. That's not so easy, but it's happening. At this moment, you can see new developments in the North Sea with windmill parks and solar energy and so on. So things are changing, and that's good. So if Europe takes the Green Deal seriously, if public authorities and private institutions and organizations would take up their responsibility, that really can make the difference. So I'm really happy with those developments, but it's all about the further implementation. It's about the concrete measures. As I said, it's about measurement, but I think we are going to the right direction. I also hope that despite all the geopolitical difficulties, that Europe and other parts of the world will work together, because there is a common agenda. So it's not only about the Green Deal, it's also about the role of Europe worldwide. And therefore, we have to cooperate on a global scale.
Thank you. I think this is a very interesting thing which you mentioned about that universities and the life sciences courses, including SDGs in the curriculum is a very interesting idea. I'm a professor, but I'm a visiting professor. I'm not a full-time professor. So I teach as a hobby.
Yeah.
So I teach business ethics and corporate governance in business schools. And what I have done is on my own, though SDGs are not a part of the curriculum, I have started sensitizing the MBA students and teaching them entirely all 17 SDGs, and have given them the classroom, exercises, and encourage them to make presentations. And I must tell you, these young MBA students are so intelligent and they grasp it so fast that some of their presentations were so well researched that I have preserved some of them, and I will be using those presentations when I have to talk about SDGs at different forums, So thank you for that. Let me now once again come back to you, Marvin. You have been the judge of Supreme Court of South Africa, and who other than you would know the importance of the justice in the lives of human beings? And this brings me to SDG goal number 16, that is peace, justice, and strong institutions. What, in your opinion, Marvin, should be done to provide access to justice for all, and particularly to the weaker section of the society?
Well, that's a question of the application of the rule of law in a society. So first of all, you need, from a legislative point of view, that the rule of law is supreme. And then the question is the application of the law, because between the executive and government and the citizens walking in the streets of Amsterdam, The only protection that the citizens have is, in fact, the judiciary between the executive and the citizen. The same thing in Mumbai or Johannesburg. And the question is, in a vast country such as South Africa and a developing economy, is the cost of establishing courts around the country. And what is needed is legislation, and it's really a simple piece of legislation, that where a judge sits, it is a court. So, for example, let's say there is and usually these are criminal matters and not civil disputes. Let's say there is a murder in some rural area in South Africa, and the only building in the area there is a school. Well, you would take that school hall, and if the judge sits there, that becomes a Supreme Court of South Africa in that area where the judge sits. And the law can be applied. And people can appear, they can take the oath, they can give evidence. Lawyers can appear to be, even though it's a hall in the school, where the judge sits becomes a court. And the judge then administers the law, hopefully in a judicial manner and in fairness to everybody. So the question of justice for all is, in fact, a cost factor. And I spoke about lawyers. Well, lawyers have to travel thousands of kilometers to get to these rural areas, perhaps. And some of the people haven't got money to afford lawyers. So in South Africa, we have a legal aid bureau where the state actually pays a nominal amount to attorneys and advocates and barristers. We have the dual legal system, as in England, the sidebar and the bar. And when I was a young lawyer, I got the princely sum of £5 a day. So that gives you a feeling of, well, I think today it's equivalent of 25 imperial pounds a day. And young lawyers in South Africa are obliged in their first, I think it's 4 years of practice, to actually go to these rural areas to appear on behalf of accused people to make sure they have proper representation before the judge in sitting in a schoolroom in some rural area. So again, it's an example. If we're going to achieve these SDGs, you've got to act. It's got to be activated. You can't just think about these things. You've got to make a plan to try and achieve these goals. And that's certainly, I've given you an example of what happens in South Africa, and it's not unique to South Africa. It's something that's adopted in many countries, especially developing economies, where the judge sits, it's a court, and can decide on the basis of application of the rule of law in the country and make a decision whether the person is guilty or not guilty, and the judge can sentence as well. So a practical application to try and get the implementation of that SDG.
So thank you. I think that's an interesting thought. Wherever the judge sits, it is the court. But let me ask you a quick supplementary question, Marvin. How do you think technology can, because there's a huge pile up of the cases and there's a capacity constraint. Do you think technology can do something in this area? Because we were just chatting before this fireside chat started about the chat GPT and the artificial intelligence. And while there are downsides of these things, until we clearly understand what will be the impacts of these newer technologies, but can the technology come to rescue of delivering the justice to common men?
Well, I think it's an aid, Mahendra. Generative artificial intelligence such as Chat GPT is an aid, but one has to look at it with a critical eye. From a corporate point of view, a director can delegate his obligations, his duties, but he can never abdicate his responsibility. So if he chooses to delegate something to, let's say, to a query to ChatGPT and then files a report according to just what ChatGPT prints out, and it's a complete misrepresentation, let's say, he can't abdicate his responsibility, he will still be liable in damages to the company. So these things are aids, and how can they be used to try and implement the question of the rule of law for all? Well, I think the one thing that is needed is the question of transcripts of evidence. Now, the artificial intelligence there is actually well developed. As I speak to you today, so the transcript is being typed. If I'm giving evidence, what I'm saying is being typed. And that's for the purposes of anything going on appeal. And also, there's always research. Nothing stops a lawyer inside a courtroom referring to Google and saying, I've looked at Google and you've said X, Y, and Z to a witness, but Google says this. What do you say about that? So artificial intelligence is an aid in the implementation, I think, of all these SDGs, and I think can be hugely helpful in trying to achieve and expedite the achievement of these SDGs. But we've got to be very careful because, in my judgment, they're not absolutely trustworthy. When you think about it, Google, which we've used for now years, if you want to understand something, you ask Google, what does this mean? It will tell you. If you ask ChatGPT, it'll give you an answer in a narrative form. And I gave you an example. Say the city of Nelson Mandela Bay is absolutely wrong. It's a whole vast area of a bay. And so one can use these things as aids to expedite the achievement, I think, of the SDGs. But the individuals such as you and I and Mr. Balkender, the individual can never disappear from trying to implement these SDGs.
No, so I think the crux which you said is interesting, that one can delegate, you can get certain routine things done through these technologies, but you can't absolve yourself from the responsibility. So thank you for that, Marvin. Let me once again turn to Mr. Balkanen. Mr. Balkanen, as you're aware, on 23rd February 2022, the European Commission adopted a proposal for a directive on the corporate sustainability due diligence, CSDD as it is called. The aim of this directive is to foster sustainable and responsible corporate behavior and to anchor human rights and environmental considerations in the company's operations and corporate governance. This, in my opinion, makes the role of corporate leaders and companies in accelerating the SDGs even more critical. How is corporate sustainability due diligence directive progressing in your opinion?
Yeah, maybe there's a connection with the important remarks of Professor Mervyn King he just made. That was about legal affairs. It was about the role of lawyers. It's about the legal system. And we are aware of the fact that the world is changing now. When I started working at EY as partner of corporate responsibility, that was in 2011. In fact, in those days, we spoke about how to integrate sustainability into business models. And that was also the reason why we founded the Dutch Sustainable Growth Coalition. How to integrate sustainability into business models. Later on, we said, you must be much more precise. It's about your business strategy, it's about your KPIs, it's about measurement tools, it's about integrated reporting. And now we talk more about impact. So the world is really changing. We are more precise, and that's, I think, a big advantage. Having said that, and Professor King spoke about SDG number 16. Also in my country, we have legal cases. We had a case about nitrogen by the Council of State. We had a CO2 procedure at the Supreme Court in the Netherlands, and we had the Court of Law that was against Shell. So you can see it's much more now an element of legal cases. Well, the question is, if you want to avoid all these legal cases, then it's a question, how can you perform as a company, for example, in another way? And it's my conviction that if a company truly is integrating sustainability, the SDGs, into their business models and business strategy, maybe you also can avoid all those legal cases. Well, the CSDDD has to do with being fair about what are you doing? What about your assessment of these sustainability criteria? So therefore, it's a new era in which we are in Europe at the moment. I already mentioned the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, and you can see at this moment, boards of companies are already busy with preparing to report in another way. And I think that's helpful. And I think the CSDD is another step in being honest about your results. And let's say if you are honest, if you're transparent in your achievements, and also honest when things are not going in the right way, I think it makes your company stronger. And if not, then you will be confronted with legal cases. I think that's a bit of situation. So people in Europe are aware of the fact that we must report in another way, but it's, let's say, it's a matter of also underlining what are the values of your company. And that is, in fact, I mentioned earlier, the gap between new views on doing business, sustainable business practices, on the one hand, being aligned with the SDGs, and on the other hand, you can see the traditional way of measurement of companies, business results in the Anglo-Saxon way, to put in that way. Well, if we say businesses have to act in another way, then it's a matter of be honest about what you have achieved. Let me give a concrete example. A good friend of mine is Feike Siebesma. He's also a friend of Paul Polman. He was the CEO of DSM, a chemical company. And if you read their annual report, you will find a paragraph with the title, What Went Wrong? And I think it's a matter of honesty. If you don't have achieved your goals, be honest about it, be transparent, so that if you're honest, you can also change your strategy as a company. I think this type of honesty is necessary, and society requires from company that you do things in another way, in a better way. I think a lot of we see a new generation of business leaders that are willing to change. Also, you were talking about Professor Johan about the young generations. Young people, young professionals require from companies to act another way. These are hopeful signs, I must say. So I consider the CSDD as an important element of a much broader view on the role of businesses in society, and that gives me hope. And so it's changing, it's necessary. It will be a rather long way, but we have to do it. And therefore, I also want to thank Professor King for everything you've done in the sphere of reporting on companies. I think it's important to underline that. It's a matter of honesty, it's a matter of values, it's a matter of future orientation.
Yeah, I think Marvin has been leading it, all these important initiatives, and I've been
Absolutely.
privileged to be with him. For example, he was the first chairman of the GRI, then he became chairman of IIRC, and he's the one who has brought in and several organizations together and working on coming out with the global baseline on reporting on sustainability. But that's a discussion for some other time. I think today let's stick to SDGs. So let me. I do agree with you, but let me also ask you. You travel extensively. Another supplement question, Mr. Balkanen, and I travel extensively. We meet several CEOs, and in private discussions, I get a feeling sometimes that there's still a large number of CEOs who still feel that climate change is still not real. Do you hear, do you get similar kind of observation, and how do we sensitize such business leaders?
Yeah. It's a great question, and it's a matter of honesty. So the first thing you can see if you are in fact a bit denying the issue of climate change, I think is stupid, but it's still there. And let's say if you are denying issues like climate change or the necessity to act in a circular way, or if you are closing your eyes for inequality issues, let's say that makes life easier for you because you don't have to act. So if you are aware of the fact that we are at risk at the moment on a global scale, climate change, for example, and you are aware of the fact that it's a reality, that means you have to act as a business person. That's the first thing. So it starts, of course, with awareness, knowing what's happening. And I think those business leaders that are just denying realities, they are making a big mistake. This is one issue. The other issue is that even if you are aware of the fact that it's a reality, you have the issue of what are the interests of shareholders? What is their approach? So it's also important that you are convincing your shareholders, for example, that you have to act in another way. And you have to convince also the shareholders that it's necessary to invest in long-term value creation, just to give an example. I think this is really key. So therefore, business leaders have a huge role. Do not deny issues around climate change. Be in line with the SDGs. Be honest about your business strategy and be creative. And it's my conviction that those business leaders that are willing to change, that will be the winners in the long run. And I'm absolutely convinced that if you are only sticking to old realities and denying important issues like climate change, you will be the loser in the long run. I'm absolutely convinced about that.
Yeah, it's like ostrich mentality. I mean, you just by putting your head in the sand, you can't wish away the storm that is coming. So, thank you for that. Let me once again turn to Mervyn. Mervyn, you are aware, and every one of us do agree that strong institution is yet another very important part of the SDG goal number 16. In your opinion, how can we build effective, accountable, and inclusive institutions at all levels?
Well, that's a very embracing question, but institutions are usually created by statute, and they become statutory legal persona, have their own legal personality. And but from the sense of thinking, for example, making sure that the ESG factors and the SDG criteria pertinent to the business of the company is integrated into the business model of the company requires thinking. And these artificial institutions are incapacitated. They have no heart, no mind, and they don't have a conscience. It's the heart, mind, and conscience of those who lead these institutions that is important. The question is, are they coming out of universities and business schools as conscious corporate leaders or conscious institutional leaders? It's one of the things that I've done with the Good Governance Academy is to try and develop I've got 481 support members like the Institute of Chartered Accountants of England and Wales, American Institute of Certified Public Accountants, IOD, India, etc. And they in turn have got millions of members, and that's how I'm able to communicate with 5.5 million accountants and directors in 135 countries. That it's important that they understand in making sure the institution is successful, that the institution is not the body making decisions. It's the collective mind of its leaders that are the heart, mind, soul, and conscience of that entity. And I gave a talk on the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, which went around the world. I said there is no such thing as a guilty company. By definition, a company is an artificial incapacitated person. So if you have an incapacitated person, it can't be guilty of a wrong. And when something goes wrong, the wrath of society should not turn against the company or the institution, should turn against its leaders, its individual leaders. And that's why it's so important from an educative point of view, quality education, SDG 4, that we make sure we teach our young accountants, our young lawyers and everything to be conscious about their leadership, conscious that they're the heart, mind, and conscience of this entity, of this institution. And I think if you have that mindset, you will improve the quality of institutions around the world and the quality of corporations. I've seen companies, and I've been exactly as Mr. Volkner and you have pointed out. There are some chief executives that say, and they've written articles in the Wall Street Journal, for example, saying this ESG is just a fad. A fad? Well, I mean, it's very interesting that in California they've had droughts for years and now they don't know what to do with all the water from the flooding. What happened? It's never happened before. Why have we had the hottest years, the last 2 years, the hottest years we've ever had since we recorded temperatures? So there is climate change. That's a reality. And if they don't take account of that, the risks and opportunities on the business, I don't believe that they're conscious corporate leaders. If they're not conscious of these realities, they can never lead that incapacitated entity properly. And that's why I'm striving to get this conscious corporate leadership concept going throughout the world.
Yes, I think leadership is extremely important in every arena, and that's also one of the objectives of the International Institute of Governance and Leadership, where you, me, and Mr. Joris Verhoeven, Mr. Balkenende is also involved with us there, and Teresa Fogelberg. And we really want to galvanize all these three kinds of leaders, as I mentioned in the beginning. And it's only the leadership that is going to make difference, and the protection of the institutions, because one kind of leadership, let's say political leadership, sometimes in certain countries we find that they try to misuse certain institutions in their favor. But the other two kinds of leadership, which is corporate leadership and civil society leadership, if there is a pushback to protect, and that's how the institutions are to be protected all the time from any kind of misuse. Let me
When I talk, sorry, I just want to make a point. Yeah,
please go ahead.
when I talk to this kind of executive that questions ESG factors, and as if they're not reality, I say to them, would you report in discharge of your duty of accountability to a company just the financial statements? It's critical, but not sufficient. Do you agree with me? They say yes. I say, now, would you file an annual report just on sustainability issues without the financial statements? Critical, but not sufficient. Do you agree with me? Yes. Do you agree with me that operationally, the natural asset is put into plant and machinery, which has been paid for by financial capital, and the intellectual capital is adding the other ingredients in order to make the product, which says a face cream for ladies or whatever. And you've got to talk to your customers to make sure they're happy, the stakeholders. All these things are integrated, or they're not. Yes, they're integrated. So
Yes,
if you think just to have financial, just sustainability as two silos, that's divorced from reality. And that's why you've got to have that integrated, and the integrated thinking and the integrated report at the top. And it concerns me that the IFRS with the ISSB is looking at expanding management commentary. Now, management is not the voice of the company, it's the board. And if there are things which are material and management talks about it, then the board hasn't discharged its duty of accountability, because if it's material, they should have dealt with it. So there are all these discussions happening at the moment with international bodies. And
I think
I'm intrigued that in the EU, they've come out with sustainability matters, which are double materiality, inside out and outside in influences.
no, so it will be interesting. I'm looking forward to the Frankfurt meeting to talk about these issues. So thank you. And I think, Marvin, I believe you have to go. You have another talk to give to Toronto. You're a busy and sought after speaker.
I'm going to Toronto, where the temperature I've checked is 12 degrees centigrade.
So stay with us for as long as you can, and
Please
quietly you
excuse
can
me.
log off. Otherwise, I want to thank you profusely for
Thank you.
being
Thank you.
with us and sharing your wisdom. Thank you. I'll continue with Ms. Balkanen. Can we have a round of applause? I'm sure you can't hear the audience, but let me clap for you, Marvin. Thank you.
Let
Thank
me
you.
just clap for Mr. Balkan. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mahendra. And bye-bye, everybody. Thank you.
Bye. So let me turn to you, Mr. Balkanen, once again. You will agree that need for climate finance is urgent. And as this is directly impacting the SDG number 13, that is climate action. What are your thoughts on climate finance and climate transition? Because, since COP 15, since Paris Agreement, rather, there was a commitment of $1 billion every year. And we have hardly been able to garner that kind of a climate finance. So your thoughts, please.
Yeah. This is an extremely important subject. If you talk about the future of our world, if you talk about sustainability, about climate change, it's indeed also about how to finance it. And that's always on the international agenda. It's when there are international meetings, the COP meetings, it's about that. And I can imagine that people in third world countries, that they say, wait a moment, which countries have caused difficulties and what does it mean for us? I think that's a real argument. And that's the reason why climate finance is always on the agenda. That's true. And I think the richer parts of the world, they also have a responsibility to invest in these important issues and also to help the poorer countries in the world. That's clear. You see many times a kind of commitments, but it's also a matter of what is really happening. And sometimes there are clear commitments, but you also can see that not always it has been realized. So this is the first warning I would like to make. If you are able to give commitments, also make it a reality of it. That's one. That's one point. The other point is, if you talk about climate change, it's also necessary to talk about the role of financial institutions. It's the role of banks, pension funds, insurance companies. Also, they can play a very important role. A good friend of mine is Herman Mulder. He's really involved in the global reporting initiatives, a former banker, and he is really a specialist in SDGs in relation to the world of finance. And he says, if you really want to make a reality of the SDGs, for example, always underline the importance of finance. If finance has not been organized in the right way, you get a difficulty. And you can make a comparison with companies. You can have, let's say, a brilliant CEO with fantastic views, but if the CFO is not on the same line, you get difficulties. That's clear. So, and if you talk about policy making, you can have nice policy goals, but if the financial aspects are not arranged in the right way, you get difficulties. So you're completely right. If you talk about climate change, it's also about climate finance. And this is, in fact, a responsibility for everyone on a global scale. It accounts for the responsibility of richer countries, but also a country like China has its responsibilities, let's be honest. And at a more national scale, it's also a matter of what can private institutions do as well. And in fact, it should be a matter of responsibility for what is happening in our world. How can we achieve, for example, the SDGs, and what does it mean for the financial aspects? And we must be very, very honest about it, because if we have not arranged the financial aspects in the right way, we will fail. That's very clear. And that's exactly, I said, the key element of your question.
Correct. So let me also compliment you that some one or two SDGs have completely been achieved in Netherlands. And you being the former prime minister and even currently, you play an important role with the current government also. Would you like to spend some time on giving us a flavor of as to what's happening within the Netherlands on the other SDGs?
Yeah. Let's say the SDGs are high on the agenda. You can find it in the coalition agreement. So there's an agreement of the current government. People are discussing it. The interesting thing is that, as I said, all the universities are busy with SDGs. That's good. A lot of companies are involved in issues around SDGs, and also cities are active. I have been member of the City Council of Amstelveen. That's a city near Amsterdam. This city at this moment has the #1 ranking. That's nice to see. So you can see the ecosystem is changing. Are we there? Of course not. We have to do much more. If you talk about, let's say, the renewables in our country, we have to do much more. We are walking behind a bit in Europe because of the situation that we are producing gas. So we have to change things. If you talk about inequality, I think if you talk about the income distribution is rather fair. We are a bit behind, let's say, the Scandinavian countries. But if you talk about property, maybe you have to think about it. So we're not there. That's true. But the key question is, of course, are we willing to analyze what countries are doing? And of course, you know the Bertelsmann Foundation in Germany, and they are comparing countries and their performance regarding the SDGs. So it's a matter of how to measure the results. And I think we have to do more, also in my country. The awareness that we need SDGs is there, but we can do much more. We also see nice initiatives. There is an initiative of two ladies in the city of The Hague, and they developed a tool they call Societal AX. That's a tool how NGOs can measure their contribution to the SDGs. I think it's very nice. So you see a lot of creativity in measuring the SDGs. We're making progress, but we have to do much more. I agree with that.
Thank you. Now, let me turn to the audience. I have received a question from an audience on my WhatsApp, and the person is asking that you have a unique combination of having been a public leader as a prime minister, former prime minister, and you're also a business leader. So in India, we have CSR regulation, as you are aware, that is corporate social responsibilities, under which 2% of the net profit the companies have to be mandatorily spending on social responsibilities. How can internationally the SDGs be embedded into the corporate responsibility? Because in companies in the United States, for example, I know they don't like to use the word social, so they call it corporate responsibility. So how can SDGs be embedded into the corporate strategy? Is the question that I have received for you.
That's an excellent question. And we have to bring up this type of question because this is about, do companies have an honest story to tell? That's a bit the point. And there are some tools we can use. In a European scale, we have been discussing that. We have the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. We have the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive. These tools are helping companies to be honest about what are you doing. That's one instrument. The second one is we have ESG. And you can use the ESG criteria for investments. That's also helpful. In Europe, you have taxonomy, and that's about how to invest in organizations. How can you invest in the right way? So we have to develop tools to do things in the right way. This is also connected with, let's say, the issue of taxation. It's important that companies are being fair and paying their taxes worldwide. So it's in fact a combination of companies can act in line with the SDGs and ESG. It's a matter of how to report about the progress you're making. And it's also about being honest about being in line with the legal system, the rule of law, but also being fair in paying taxes. If you have this type of combination, then you can do things in the right way, acting in a social, responsible way. And therefore, your remark is nice. It's not only about ecology, it is also about social. We have to be honest about that. What about labor conditions? What about income distribution within companies? It's there. So therefore, this question is great. And it's also about practicalities. You can have beautiful stories. You can have the nicest goals. but it's all about what are you doing in practice.
So, because we have audience from almost 6 continents, let me share with them the some of the best practices that are happening in India. How Indian large companies are embedding SDGs into their strategy. For example, so this 2% of the money that they are mandatorily are asked to spend. For example, a company which is in IT, if it is investing in developing the uh, youngsters towards the coding kind of courses, and they spend money in developing the people in community on those, so that's one talent development and the skill development. If they invest into that, the company is also doing a social good. At the same time, these youngsters which are being prepared with the newer skills will also be employable youngsters for the same company. Similarly, for a pharmaceutical company, the healthy employees are extremely important. And therefore, in the community, if they take up a project of the regular medical checkups and taking care of the health of the people in and around the factory areas where their factories are situated, then that also becomes an extremely good initiative, because they are taking care of the health parameters of the people around, and therefore their own employees which will come from these areas will be healthy, and so on and so forth, kind of thing. So you have been a chair of a coalition where 8 companies, Dutch companies, where they came together. Any of the success story you'd like to share with our international audience?
I'm happy to make that you make this remark about, let's say, your experiences in India. I have my experience in my country, in the Netherlands. In 2011, we said it's remarkable that a lot of Dutch companies are high on the Dow Jones Sustainability Index. And I spoke about that with Paul, and we said, in fact, we should join forces. And then we were working together with 8 companies, and we've said, what can we learn from each other when we talk about integration of sustainability into business models? So we've been writing a report on that and theoretical frameworks. The second report was about, if you are convinced that you need sustainable growth business models, how to implement it within your own organization. What about the tone at the top, ownership within the organization, remuneration systems, transparency? The third report was, how can we as 8 companies contribute to the SDGs and to climate change? And the last report was about, how can we contribute to the circular economy? You can learn from each other. We have annually meeting with the Dutch cabinet. We speak about what is the government responsibility and what can we do. For example, we have given the advice to the Dutch government, if, let's say, our king is paying a state visit to another country, when that is a visit, sustainability should also be in the program. If the prime minister or minister of the Dutch government go to other countries, also always take into account the issue of sustainability. My own example, I've been attending many countries. Every time when I was in a country, the Dutch embassy organizes meetings between the Dutch companies and other companies from that country about sustainable business practices. And I think this is helpful to join forces, and it also leads to new creativity. Let me give a concrete example. The KLM, the air carrier, is one of the companies, and also DSM, the chemical company. And in planes you need cargo nets, and they're very heavy. Well, KLM and DSM, they work together to realize much lighter cargo nets. It leads to saving of energy. Just a concrete example. And I can give many of those examples. There must be willingness to work together. And I think this beautiful example of SDG number 17, if you want to realize the SDGs, you need partnerships. And that means partnerships among companies, public-private partnerships, partnership with the knowledge centers like universities and so on. So you have a lot of possibilities, but you must have the willingness to do it. And I'm happy with, let's say, our experience, and we can learn from others. We can learn from your country and from other parts in the world. We are living on one planet.
Thank you, sir. Let me take you back to your era when you were the Prime Minister of Netherlands. I read somewhere Tony Blair, or rather I heard him, Tony Blair, he said that good governance is neither a pure politics nor a pure developmental economics. it's a combination of both. And in different countries, different political leaders decide what that combination can be. I would like to invite your comments on that.
Yeah, let me go back to President Mervyn King. He said, if you want to realize integrated reporting, you need integrated thinking. And when you're a political leader, it's so important that you serve society. The first goal of a politician must not be your own re-election. The first goal should be how to serve your country, the European Union, and the world. I think this is really key. And then, if you want to realize that's your policy goals, you have to understand you never can act alone. In the time when I was Prime Minister, we realized many reforms in social security, in health, in pre-pension systems, and so on. But we were convinced that if you want to realize those reforms, you must work together with the social partners, the organizations of employees and employees. So what I learned in those days is if you want to be successful, if you want to reach your goals, you need each other. And that's the reason why people are talking in terms of the ecosystem. Suppose you would have a government that is really willing to realize SDGs. But if companies are not convinced that you have to realize the SDGs, or universities or NGOs, then you will not reach anything. So the important thing is you must really work together with others. And that's what I try to do as Prime Minister, work together with others, be clear in what you want to reach. And it's also a matter of partnerships. That's the way I see it. So it was, I think, a nice remark of Tony Blair, I know very well, and also his successor and many others. Yes. I've also been in your beautiful country. That is also great. I remember that.
Yeah. So no, thank you. This is extremely, extremely important that the role of private sector along with the government is so important because before the SDGs, we had MDGs, which were Millennium Development Goals. They were 9 Millennium Development Goals, and they were not so much successful as the SDGs are because that time the involvement of the private sector was not there. And the United Nations leadership over a period of time realized that it's extremely important to involve the private sector and also the civil society leader. And therefore, this trinity, I keep coming back to this, which is also the focus of International Institute of Governance and Leadership. You made an extremely important point that to have the private sector on board, ministers or governments alone can't do everything. Excuse me.
Having said that, one of the people asked a question. I must say, I feel a bit privileged because I was active in politics and in the business sector and academia. And I think it's a nice combination.
Oh, yes. That's a unique combination, and not very many examples are there. So we also were supposed to have Mr. Roberto Ocampo, the former finance minister. He was traveling from Manila to London. So to you and to our international audience, I want to apologize and say because his flight got delayed and he still have not been able to reach to his hotel. So we'll have to bring this fireside chat to a premature close. But let me thank you first profusely, Mr. Balkanen, that you stayed with us for so long and you have um, actually, I remember and go in our planning stage of this global governance and leadership series. We had a call with you and you were so supportive. And without your support, I don't think we would have come this far. So thank you very much. And we would continue to need your support, sir. The next global governance and leadership series, next episode, is going to be there in the month of June, which will be the 29th June from 2:30 p.m. to 5 p.m. Central European Time. And I am happy to announce and request all my international audience to please block your calendar for 29th June 2023 from 2:30 p.m. to 5 p.m. Central European Time. For those who are from India, it will be 6 p.m. onwards. And Dr. Patrick Verkugen, who is the CEO and the chairman of the executive board of the Global Center for Adaptation, will be our esteemed speakers. And we are also expecting confirmation from two political leaders. I'm told I should not announce their name till I get their written confirmation, but it's important that you block diary. With this, I would like to bring this fireside chat to a close with once again a round of applause for all of our speakers, particularly for Mr. Balkanan, who stayed till the last moment with us. Thank you, sir. Have a good day.
Thank you. I wish you all the best. We need you. Thank you.